Hey everyone, if you're new here, hit that like button and subscribe for more raw confessions like this. I never thought I'd be saying this out loud. But after my father died, I ended up sleeping with my stepmother. I was completely lost, barely passing my college exams, drowning in grief that made every breath feel heavy. The old house became my prison because I couldn't afford rent anywhere else. Nights were the worst. The empty rooms seemed to press in closer, shadows stretching long across the walls, and there was no one left to turn to. No calls, no voices breaking the silence except my own shaky ones when the tears came. Elena was suddenly the only person left in my life, the one constant in a world that had cracked wide open. She had always been the beautiful, younger woman Dad married 5 years ago, curvy with long dark hair that carried this faint jasmine scent whenever she passed by, soft and warm like a secret you weren't supposed to notice. Now, with him gone, she handled the bills without a word of complaint, cooked simple meals that filled the kitchen with quiet steam, and shared those heavy evenings with me in the same house we once all lived in. There was no escaping her presence. She was everywhere, from the kitchen table where we'd sit across from each other not quite meeting eyes, to the hallway late at night when I'd hear her soft footsteps padding past my door. I told myself it was just grief making everything feel too close. But her warmth lingered in the air after she left a room, that jasmine railing behind like an invisible pull. One evening, the rain tapping softly against the windows, she brushed past me in the narrow hallway while I was grabbing a glass of water. Our arms touched for a second too long, her skin radiating heat through the thin fabric of her robe. I froze, pulse jumping, then pulled back fast, muttering something about being tired. She just smiled gently, that sad kind of smile, and kept walking, but the spot where we touched burned for hours afterward. Another night, after a particularly rough day of staring at Dad's old chair in the living room, she found me on the couch fighting back stupid tears. Elena sat beside me without asking, her hand resting lightly on my shoulder, fingers warm and steady. "It's okay to not be okay," she whispered, her breath brushing my ear like a secret. I wanted to lean into that touch so badly, to let the ache even for a moment, but guilt slammed into me hard. This was Dad's wife. What the hell was wrong with me? Still, when she didn't move her hand right away, the air between us grew thick, charged with something neither of us named. The house felt smaller every day, her presence wrapping around the quiet like a blanket I both craved and feared. Mornings she'd make coffee, the scent mixing with her jasmine, and I'd catch myself watching the way her hair fell over one shoulder as she poured. Evenings we'd sit in the living room with the TV murmuring low, our knees almost touching on the couch, the space between us humming with unspoken words. I kept telling myself to stop, to put distance between us, but the loneliness clawed deeper whenever she wasn't near. It was like gravity, slow and inevitable, drawing me closer to the one person I knew I shouldn't want. And then, one ordinary afternoon while sorting through some of Dad's things in the hallway closet, her hand accidentally grazed mine, reaching for the same box. We both paused, eyes locking for a heartbeat longer than necessary. Her breath hitched just a little, warm and close, and in that millimeter of space where nothing happened, everything almost did. I pulled away first, heart hammering, but the memory of that near touch stayed with me, replaying in the dark when the house grew to still. What was Dad really thinking when he left us here like this, tangled in the same grief, the same walls closing in? I couldn't shake the feeling that the air itself was whispering secrets I wasn't ready to hear. I started noticing the small things first, the kind that crept in when my guard was down. In the narrow hallway after dinner, her shoulder would brush mine as we passed, the fabric of her robe soft and warm against my arm. I'd pull away too quickly, heart stuttering, telling myself it was nothing, just the house being too small now. But that faint jasmine scent she left behind clung to my shirt, pulling my thoughts back even as I tried to focus on anything else. What the hell was wrong with me? She was Dad's wife, the woman who'd stood beside him at the altar, the one who'd held his hand through those last rough months. Yet every time her hand lingered a second longer on my shoulder while she comforted me during one of those sudden breakdowns, something inside shifted. I'd catch myself staring at the way her robe clung after a shower, steam still rising faintly from her skin, and guilt would hit like ice water. I shouldn't be looking. I shouldn't be feeling this pull. The tension grew in the quiet, everyday moments we couldn't avoid. After long hours studying at the kitchen table, she'd come up behind me, her fingers pressing gently into my tense shoulders, working out the knots with slow, careful circles. "You carry everything so tight," she'd murmur, her voice low and close, breath warm against the back of my neck. The silk of her nightgown would brush my arm as we sat together later, watching old family videos on the couch, her knee almost touching mine in the dim light. I'd replay those touches in bed at night, my body responding even while my mind screamed betrayal. "He's barely in the ground. This is wrong." But the house felt warmer whenever she was near, the sharp edges of loneliness softening only in her company. The jasmine scent on the couch pillows after she'd left the room kept drawing me back, like an invisible thread I couldn't cut. I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, fighting the ache that built low and insistent, telling myself to put distance between us, to stop noticing how her presence filled the empty spaces dead left behind. Still, every morning her coffee mixed with that same soft floral note, and I'd find my eyes tracing the curve of her hair falling over one shoulder as she poured. One stormy night, the rain hammering against the windows like it wanted in, we shared a bottle of Dad's old whiskey to remember him. The power flickered and died, plunging us into darkness broken only by flashes of lightning. We huddled under a thick blanket on the couch for warmth, her body pressed close against mine, the heat of her skin seeping through thin layers. Thunder rolled overhead, masking the way our breaths quickened in the charged air. Her hand found mine under the blanket, fingers intertwining slowly, then sliding higher along my arm. I didn't pull away. In that moment, with the storm raging outside and the whiskey warm on our tongues, everything tilted. Her face turned toward me in the dark, lips brushing mine in the space between breaths, soft and trembling with the same forbidden hunger I felt tearing me apart inside. Mixing with her jasmine scent, pulling me under like gravity I had no strength to fight. My mind fractured between stop and don't stop, between grief and this aching need that made the loneliness vanish for one suspended heartbeat. We crossed the line there, in the thunder and the dark, her touch igniting something neither of us could name or take back. And as the rain continued to fall, I knew nothing in this house would ever feel the same again. After that night, the house didn't feel empty anymore, not in the way it had. We'd wait for the lights in the neighborhood to go out, one by one, until only our silence remained. Then her door would creak open down the hall. Or mine would. Her touch became the only thing that made the days bearable. A slow brush of fingers along my wrist while she passed me the salt at dinner, the way she'd lean in to adjust my collar, her jasmine scent wrapping around me like a secret I was terrified to keep. I told myself it was just comfort. Grief doing what grief does, but every time her hand lingered, heat blooming where skin met skin, the ache inside me answered back louder than any voice of reason. We developed this quiet rhythm. After midnight, when the world outside slept, I'd find her in the living room or she'd slip into my room. No words at first, just the soft rustle of fabric, the shared breath that grew heavier the closer we got. Her fingers tracing patterns on my chest through my shirt, never quite pushing further, yet promising everything. It made me feel wanted, seen, like I wasn't just the kid who'd lost his father, but someone she needed too. The crushing weight in my chest lifted a little each time. Bills got sorted without the panic that used to choke me. The fridge stayed full. The house started to hum again instead of echoing. In the mornings we'd share these tiny stolen glances over coffee, a secret smile when her foot brushed mine under the table. That jasmine mixed now with something warmer, something that clung to my clothes and followed me through the day like a confession I couldn't wash off. I hated how much I craved it. How the loneliness that used to swallow me whole now waited patiently for her return. Weeks blurred. One afternoon I was in Dad's study, sorting through boxes of old papers because the lawyer said we had to. Dust motes danced in the slanted light. My hands shook a little turning envelopes. Then I found it, a sealed letter with my name in his handwriting, dated months before the end. I sat there on the floor, heart hammering, and tore it open. The words hit like thunder rolling in slow motion. He wrote about knowing the cancer was winning, about how he worried for me, alone after he was gone. And then, the part that stopped my breath. He said he'd always seen something between Elena and me. The way we talked, the way she looked at me sometimes when she thought no one noticed. He hoped, if the worst happened, that we'd take care of each other. Really take care of each other, that the thought brought him peace. Did he plan this? Was I living out some final wish he'd planted like a seed? The paper trembled in my hands. His hidden intention stared back at me. Ink on page, impossible to unsee. I folded it carefully, hid it deep in a drawer, but the words burned behind my eyes every time I closed them. That night the guilt came in waves so strong I could barely stand. I stood at the mantel staring at his photo, that familiar smile now twisted into something like judgment, or blessing. I couldn't tell which. This is what he wanted, or am I just twisting his words to excuse the hunger that's taken over me? When Elena found me there, her hand rested lightly on my back. Warm through my shirt, I turned and pulled her close before I could stop myself. Her breath caught, quick and shallow against my neck. We didn't speak about the letter, not then, but every touch after carried his shadow. Her fingers in my hair felt heavier. The way her body leaned into mine under the dim lamplight tasted bittersweet, like whiskey and rain and something I was terrified to name. I kept telling myself to stop, to put space between us before it consumed everything. Yet when the house grew dark and her door clicked open, my feet carried me anyway, the pleasure twisted now with this new fear. That I'd become exactly what he intended. That maybe I'd always been heading here, pulled by gravity I never saw coming. Her jasmine scent filled the space between us as she whispered my name, soft and trembling. My mind split wide open, one half screaming betrayal, the other drowning in the relief of her warmth. And then, as her forehead rested against mine in the dark, she breathed something that made my blood run cold and hot all at once. The secret routine grew more intense after that. Every evening the air in the house felt thicker, like the walls themselves were holding their breath with us. Her jasmine perfume no longer just lingered. It wrapped around my thoughts even when she was across the room, mixing with a load red that made my stomach twist. Pulse already racing before she appeared. One morning the neighbor from down the street knocked, her eyes to sharp, asking why my car was always in the driveway so late and if everything was okay since Dad passed. I mumbled something about settling the estate, but her gaze flicked toward the upstairs window where Elena's silhouette moved behind the curtain. Heat crawled up my neck. The questions felt like fingers prying at the fragile shell we'd built. That same afternoon Elena set me down in the kitchen, her fingers brushing mine as she poured coffee. She admitted it then, voice barely above a whisper. She had found a copy of the letter weeks earlier, tucked in Dad's things. She had known about his wishes. The quiet ho, Pei-chi written down. Her eyes held mine, trembling with the same storm I felt. It made me feel less alone in wanting this, she said. The confession only pulled us deeper. The obsession sharpened. Every shared glance now carried his shadow, turning simple touches into something heavier, something blessed and cursed at once. Yet the risks piled up like storm clouds. I couldn't focus at work anymore. Meetings blurred while her scent haunted me, and the fear of someone noticing the way we looked at each other made my hands shake when I answered calls. Nights became fevered with the almost moments. Her hand hovering near mine on the counter, breath warm against my ear as she reached for a glass. Bodies so close the air between us crackled. I kept thinking we should stop, that this comfort was becoming a trap it'd never escape. But stopping felt like tearing out the only light left in the dark house he left behind. The letter changed everything and nothing. It deepened the pull until I couldn't tell where my hunger ended and his final intention began. After another night where the old radio played that faint song we once danced to in the living room, the one with the slow violin that used to make Dad smile, I lay there with the texture of her warmth still burning against me like an invisible brand. The music drifted through the quiet, soft and haunting, wrapping around the ache in my chest. I knew I had to choose. Walk away from the only thing keeping the loneliness at bay, or step fully into whatever life Dad had secretly hoped for us. My mind warred until dawn. One voice screamed this was wrong, that I was losing pieces of myself in the gravity of her nearness. The other whispered that maybe this was the peace he wanted for both of us, two broken people finding shelter in each other. The scent of jasmine still clung to my skin, mixing with the faint trace of rain from the open window. I chose to stay, for now. It felt irreversible, like crossing a threshold he had quietly left unlocked. The decision settled over me like heavy silk. Soft, enveloping, and impossible to shrug off. The house no longer echoed with absence. It hummed with a new, trembling life, one laced with guilt and an ache that refused to fade. So tell me in the comments, do you think I did the right thing by staying? Or should I have walked away from it all? Was Dad's letter a blessing or a curse? If you want the even more intense details of what happened next, like and subscribe. I might share more in the next confession. Thanks for listening to my story. Even now, when the radio plays that song and her door creaks softly in the night, I wonder if I'm living his dream, or just falling deeper into the one he planted inside.